On the evening of June 5th, 1942, Our Lady of Victory's convent was, as you would expect it to be, quiet. 6-year-old Mary Evelyn Briggs woke up in the dead of night. She wasn't sure why. There had been a particular sound that had caused her to wake up, but she couldn't figure out what it was. Though it did sound familiar. As her eyes adjusted to the darkened, moonlit room, however, the sound left her mind in favor of terror. There, in front of her, was a figure in the darkness. In his hand was something she assumed to be a knife. She saw its blade reflect in the moonlight outside of the window. In his other hand was her hair. "Shh," he said to her, but she did not. She let out a horrendous scream in panic. She then watched as the man scrambled away and hopped through the window into the night. Edna Marie Heidel, with whom Mary shared the room, sat up in bed and wondered what was happening that caused Mary to scream like that. She'd heard nothing after all. She'd simply woken up to Mary screaming. When the caretakers of the convent came into the room to see what was going on, Mary told them that she'd seen a man in the room, but that he'd already climbed out the window. They may have dismissed her claim entirely if they hadn't have noticed something odd. Mary wondered why they were looking at her the way that they were, but it soon became obvious. The man who was in the room with her had cut her hair. The object that she had mistaken for a knife had actually been a pair of scissors, and the sound which had awakened her had been the snip of those scissors on her hair. Now that someone had turned on the lights, she could see Edna looking at her. She, also unknowingly, was missing a lock of hair. The grounds were searched for anyone who didn't belong there, but nobody was found. The police were called and a report was made, but Mary's description of a man who was, quote, sorta short, sorta fat, and was wearing a white sweatshirt, was not ultimately found to be helpful. After this, Mary and Edna were left to fall asleep. Each night, however, they would stare out the window, wondering if he would come back or not. Fortunately for the girls, he never did. But that didn't mean that he never struck again. Just a few days after this event, in fact, 6-year-old Carol Piety awoke in the morning after a good night's sleep. When she looked in the mirror, she saw, much to her shock and surprise, that the barber had struck again. Some of her hair had been cut off in the middle of the night without her even waking up. This was unusual. You would think that this would be the sort of thing that a person wouldn't sleep through. When her parents saw this, they called the police. Carol had been sleeping next to her twin brother, David, but neither of them had seen or heard anything. How could someone have slept through that? The police were able to find a single sandy footprint, likely left by the intruder, but it was of no use to them at all. They also discovered the intruder's point of entry. He had made a slit in one of the home's window screens. The police looked for the perpetrator of these crimes, but the Piety slept with one eye open after these events. The Friday following the Piety intrusion, he did something unusual. He varied his M.O. Once again, he cut through the window screen and snuck into the home of Mr. and Mrs. Terrell Heidelberg. This would be the first and only time that he was not after hair. While the couple slept, the intruder snuck up on them, brandishing a heavy metal bar. Mr. Heidelberg was knocked out, and Mrs. Heidelberg was beaten. The attacker left immediately following, before either of them got a good look at him. It was like being attacked by a ghost. The only thing that seemed to connect this case with the others was the slit in the screen. But surely a screen was easy access to anybody who wanted entry into a home. But nonetheless, the police did connect this crime with the others. In any case, the barber would strike just one more time. A few days after the previous attack, Mrs. R.B. Taylor woke from her sleep to what she described to be something with a sickening smell. Then she eventually passed out again, because her next memory was of waking up and being sick. When she saw herself in the mirror, she knew that the barber had been here. A full lock of hair was missing from her head. When the police arrived, they found that the screen had been slit again, probably by the same person. But the smell was something new, and it shed light on why the other victims hadn't awakened during the barbering. It turns out that the sickening smell that Mrs. Taylor spoke of was chloroform. Likely it had been used all along to ensure that his victims didn't wake up during their haircut. It is possible that he had simply forgotten during his visit to Mary to apply it to her. Mrs. Taylor had been sleeping in a room with her husband and her 2 daughters after all. That's quite a risk for someone who doesn't want to be caught. He had to remember it this time. Likely he drugged her husband first and then the rest of the family before taking Mrs. Taylor's hair. In any case, the Phantom Barber was never heard from again. The only description we have of his appearance was the one witness who saw him, Mary Briggs, and her description of a man who was sorta short, sorta fat, and wearing a white sweatshirt never ended up catching the guy. He simply disappeared into the night. Where he went was anyone's guess.